The product founder era is here, and things will only get more intense in that direction. It won't go away, and essentially the product skill set aligns more and more to the founder or CEO skill set. Let's talk a little bit about the history of the eras of founders when it comes to specifically the software industry. What we've seen is initially a first wave of tech-led founders with the arrival of the tech titans today, be it Google, Meta, Amazon. Founders solved a technical problem that was not solvable before, right? Indexing the web, hosting scalable servers at a scale never done before. That arguably lasted until 2010, following which we entered the sales era or the commercial era, where distribution was the main bottleneck. And we saw businesses such as Salesforce, products like Teams that, won a lot of market share over arguably better products like Slack. And it was all about enterprise access for a lot of software companies who could distribute things better, who could sell to the big corporates, etc. And now we are in what I call the product era for founders, where product skill set becomes really the core skill set, where we see companies like Notion, companies like Lovable, companies like Anthropic, where you have a product-led growth first and foremost, where the hand-holding around professional services is very light, where the operations themselves are productized, where the sales process itself is productized. So throughout the organization, you have to apply product thinking in order to solve problems and in order to gain traction. So I remember a year ago, there was a kind of freak out around product being dead. It's something that I saw a lot on my product bubble LinkedIn. AI was threatening to automate every job. And at the time, it was very hard to know where to draw the line in the sand around what it could and couldn't do. And what became very obvious with time is that AI decreases the cost of production. However, deciding, curating, and tailoring what we build in an era of overabundance becomes the bottleneck skill set. Andrew Ng, the machine learning professor at Stanford, said that in the AI era, product becomes the bottleneck and developers become, they have a higher reach and a higher lever of what they can do in less time. So what I've started to see with these founders is that they've been needing my fractional CPO expertise more than ever. They've been needing to think like product managers when it comes to every part of their company. So this podcast, you could see as a little bit of a betrayal to the product community. Sorry, folks, to teaching our trade secrets to founders and CEOs, because product expertise no longer only belongs to product people, but it now fully belongs to founders. So the goal of this podcast will be to be educational around teaching industry tricks and teaching founders the craft of product management, of product leadership more specifically, and applying this across the organization. Now, why the Series A blueprint specifically? Where this comes in is that there is the segment from pre-seed to Series A, which arguably is the riskiest segment in the life cycle of any startup, excluding, what you're doing before the first round. So in one of the interviews that I had with the founders that I'm going to be publishing soon, one of the things that she said was, the issue with being a founder is that you become an expert of every fundraising round, but by the time you become an expert, you actually move on to the next round. So my positioning here and the idea of this education is to really, for me to be fixed on the pre-Series A segment of things and to demystify and to create what I call a blueprint for how to go from the promise that you make at the seed or pre-seed round and turn that into traction at Series A. Over the years, I've seen a lot of repeatable frameworks, a lot of repeatable mistakes that could have been avoided, and a lot of mental models that, when applied, stop founders from falling into pigeonholes, from focusing on the wrong thing, and effectively making what I call more efficient product bets, where they know better what hypotheses to strike, how to validate those quicker, and how to get those to market faster, which basically means you actually reach the metrics that your investors expect with less capital and over less time, of course, because these two things are linked. So this podcast enables founders to get to Series A readiness with the traction that's required faster. And that's why I want to speak to founders and VCs and product leaders around what works and what doesn't work around various industries. So the Series A blueprint that I've created and that I'm going to be sort of speaking about both here and generally on my LinkedIn is divided into three categories, the three Ps. One is product. So how do you actually determine what is of value, and how do you add as much value as possible to your customer, and how do you build it in the right way? The second P is process. How do you run your team in order for it to be aligned and to operate with as high of a margin as possible and as efficiently and effectively as possible? So how do you design your touch point? How do you actually build an org or your product operations, your product operating model so that you are as successful as possible? And then the third P is pipeline, because even though some of you or most of you are likely to have a GTM, a go-to-market founder, as soon as those entries come in, you need to make sure that your onboarding, your activation, your 7-day retention, and then your long-term retention is not leaky. So how do you think about that? And when it comes to these three Ps, there are a lot of frameworks that I'm seeing out in the wild. There's a lot of frameworks that I've created myself that I want to share with you guys, and from other experts in the field that I also want to discuss. So I hope that if you take one thing from this episode as a founder, is that you should be interested in product management, and you certainly should not outsource that fully to the first PM that you're going to hire. You need a tighter understanding of the discipline in order to be a more effective product leader inside of your org. Now, I've been seeing a lot of orgs that have a CPO earlier on, which raises the question of, do I need to act as a CPO, as a CEO or not? And the answer is, whatever you do as a CEO, you need to have a strong CPO skill set. Even if the responsibility is outsourced, you need a good way to know whether things are done right and done well. So one of the main things that we're going to be talking about and have already talked about in previous episodes is product thinking. I want to tell you guys a little bit of a story that I've seen across many customers to kind of illustrate the importance of the product leadership skill. And namely, the number one problem or the number one symptom that I see in product teams amongst clients is the perception that engineers are too slow. For those who are listening to the audio only, I put that in between quotation marks because some engineers, of course, are slow, but most of the time it has to do with how you're conducting or guiding product management as a process inside of your org. And namely, a lot of the product leadership operating ways that you're going to carry out are going to determine the speed to ROI. And the whole art of product leadership is actually getting to value sooner for the customer, especially in the pre-Series A round, right? You're creating value as much as possible. The capturing can kind of happen later as long as you're demonstrating that that's happening. You can up your prices as you deliver more value. So yeah, I've worked with a lot of customers that sort of had the perception that no value was being delivered for, up to 4 months. And that's an insane amount of time before Series A, right? I mean, these rounds, you pretty much have 12 months to get to readiness to attain the metrics and the traction that you've promised. And then you kind of want to leave a sort of 3 to 6 month buffer to start fundraising. So 4 months is already like a third of that time. So how are you going to shorten those gaps where you're not actually getting to that value soon enough? And also, one other thing that I want to say is that the better founders are understanding the product craft, and the better they can actually create a product-led organization. And I believe that in the era of AI, there will be so much automation that companies that will win will have two attributes. One is founder branding will be really strong. And two, the product will be really good. And I think the combination of those two factors will determine who stands out in the new era. So for the next episodes, I'm going to be speaking to a couple of founders and experts around some of the battles that they've had on the journey from pre-seed to Series A. So tune in and listen to the next episodes so you can get an on-the-ground understanding of what that looks like. Stay on. Cheers. This is the Series A Blueprint, and I'm Alex Kareem Howard. Thanks for listening. Are you an early stage founder and you want to go deeper into the product craft and you feel inspired by the topics that we're discussing on this show? You can reach out to me on the links in the show notes and we can have a discussion and go deeper into your product problems. I'd be happy to chat. Just reach out. All right. Thanks for the show. And don't forget to subscribe, folks. See you next time.
Series A Blueprint Podcast.